On May 10, 2023, a 92-year-old Taiwanese citizen, whose identity remains unknown, passed away.
According to confidential and verified information, she was the last woman known as a comfort woman. Although it may sound poetic, this name refers to a group of women who suffered some of the most sinister and horrifying wartime crimes in recent history. If you are not familiar with this term, consider yourself fortunate.
Women with faces full of fear are lined up against a wall. A man presumed to be a Chinese officer talks to them. This short 18-second video is of 7 Korean women sexually enslaved by the Japanese soldiers in Yunnan province, southwest of China around the end of World War II. It is the first ever video footage of Korean victims that has been found.
Today, we are going to tell you the tragic story of the comfort women of Japan, and how thousands of women lost their lives as prisoners in Japanese military brothels. Whenever World War II is discussed, it is impossible to overlook the horrors committed by the Nazis.
The Holocaust, genetic experiments, and even the sadistic torture of war prisoners by the Germans are immeasurable.
However, when listing these wartime atrocities, the abuses committed by Japanese imperial soldiers are often forgotten, especially in China and Korea, where this army was particularly cruel. The treatment of prisoners was abominable. They were decapitated, buried alive, and even forced to engage in acts of cannibalism. The most terrifying example was the Nanking Massacre in China in 1937, a nightmare that lasted for 42 days, during which 200,000 people were killed, and Japan still tries to downplay it. In addition to the massacre, an unknown number of women were taken as prisoners to be enslaved as Ianfu, which is the term for comfort women in Japan, a horrifying fate for any woman.
During the 19th century, in Japan, there were the so-called Karayuki-san, a group of young women and girls who were regulated prostitutes by the authorities. The purpose of this group of women was to serve as a protective measure for the rest of the inhabitants in the areas under attack. They were sacrificial and provided sexual services to the invaders, preventing the imperial soldiers from systematically raping the other local women. Yes, you heard correctly, the government authorized the sexual abuse of a specific group of women to preserve the majority. If this situation sounds terrible to you, when you hear about the Ianfu, you will see that it is infinitely worse. Ianfu is a Japanese word that means women who provide comfort and rest, but this is nothing more than terminology to hide the terror. The Ianfu or comfort women were women taken as prisoners of war who were turned into sex slaves by the Japanese Imperial Army during World War II.
Many women, mostly Chinese and Koreans, ranging from their early 20s to as young as 12, recount that they were kept as prisoners in subhuman conditions in places called comfort stations, which were nothing more than vulgar brothels or bordellos. They lived in conditions of slavery, they were poorly fed, lacked hygiene, and were constantly abused, both by their employers and the soldiers who used their services. Each young woman was raped by around 60 soldiers per day. Yes, you heard that right, these women, in some cases girls, were raped by an absurd number of men without anyone stopping them. In the worst scenarios, they were subjected to appalling humiliation, extreme torture, and violence, just to satisfy the morbid desires of Japanese soldiers. The testimonies of the victims are truly chilling. Korean survivor Ocasian Lee was one of the few who had the strength to make her story visible, shedding light on the atrocities suffered by so many. She was unequivocal in describing those brothels. They were not places for humans, they were slaughterhouses.
Other testimonies are equally or even more shocking. "I didn't want night to come because that's when my torture began," said Ellen van der Ploeg, another survivor who had been sexually exploited by imperial soldiers during World War II. To make it clear what these women endured during these years of terror, let's hear a first-hand account. This moment can be distressing for the average viewer, so we recommend particular caution. Lee Ocasian was one of the hundreds of thousands of women across Asia who were forced to work as sex slaves for the Japanese Imperial Army during World War II.
She was only 15 when she was abducted.
그 날짜도 안 적을지고 7월달인데 7월 29일 날에 11살, 12, 16, 15 무슨 힘이 쓰러지면 그런데 이제 그 가로들한테 칼로 옷을 다 떼는데 칼로 옷을 다 떼고 피가 막 나오죠. 그랬을 때 강간하는 거예요. 14살짜리 보고 군인 하려다 40명 내지 50명 거예요. 24시간 동안에 40명, 50명 어떻게 그걸 죽여야 되지. 옷이 감은 여자, 나이 어린 여자들이 물대가 빠져 자살하고 산 높은 데 올라가서 구불러 죽고 목을 메고 애기 낳아서 길리는 사람들 구멍물에 끌고 가갖고 거꾸로 물에 갖다 엮고 안 죽을까봐 술탄 그것도 근처에서 치료를 한 거야. 이 양반도 그래서 했으려고 한 3년. 어떤 할머니들은 말할 수 있다지만 난 끝까지 말할 거야. 그래갖고 내 죽기 전에 해명을 받아야지. 죽은 다음에 뭐 식대나.
The apologies Liu Keixian speaks of are apologies from the Japanese government on behalf of the Imperial Army. The truth is that this historical reparation by the authorities never really materialized. Although in 1992, the Japanese government issued a statement admitting that we cannot deny that the former Japanese army played an important role in the kidnapping and detention of comfort women, the official position, both of the government and society in general, was to downplay the claims and deny what happened. In general, they aim to debunk any allegations against Japanese actions during World War II and defend this stance by stating that the soldiers were just doing their duty to defend the nation. Mostly, this sentiment is followed by young Japanese who claim to be tired of having to apologize to China and Korea for everything that happened during the war. In extreme cases, some politicians and sectors of society directly deny that any of these events, including the existence of the comfort women and the horrors they endured, ever even occurred. In the Tokyo trials, where Japanese soldiers were tried for their crimes in World War II, not a single one was convicted of any crimes related to the comfort stations. Japanese society remains very sensitive and reactive to this matter, leading to the censorship of artworks in art galleries and even fiction and literature that touch on this taboo subject. The only action taken by the Japanese government to attempt to compensate the victims of these inhuman crimes was to donate around $7 million to a fund for those affected in China and Korea. This financial settlement was considered an insult by the survivors, who were not even consulted before reaching this agreement. Official figures state that around 20,000 women were victims of these abuses, but more serious and unbiased investigations suggest that approximately 400,000 sex slaves, most of them died during the war due to the mistreatment and violence inflicted upon them by the soldiers and their employers. The fatal victims of this tragedy were almost all the women and girls who went through these prostitution and torture centers. A considerable number died due to syphilis and gonorrhea, while others died due to the subhuman conditions in which they lived. Most were directly tortured, subjected to abortions to keep working. What's even more terrible is that some employers did it just for fun. Among the survivors, most couldn't have children due to sexually transmitted diseases or acquired traumas. Many couldn't rebuild their lives after those years of humiliation and kept a shameful silence. Some fell into alcoholism and addiction, while tragically, a large number of comfort women chose suicide as a way out. Those who survived say that there is not a single night in their nightmares where the shadow of the memories of those endless years of torture doesn't appear.
There are very few brave individuals who are able to verbalize and express their pain, perhaps holding the secret hope that the world will know their story, and that such ruthless and cruel crimes will never be repeated in the history of humanity. Even today, it remains a painful and forbidden topic, both for society and for those who went through that ordeal. So much so that there are hardly any cultural elements that refer to this tragic event. There is only the Korean series Pachinko, which narrates the drama experienced by these women forced into prostitution, and the documentary Because We Were Beautiful, which reflects the experiences of women and girls, mostly virgins, who lived through the torment of being sex slaves during World War II. That's where the video concludes. If you want to learn more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, and if you liked the video, give it a like so we can continue to tell these stories.